that it needs.
Sam Stein, let's be clear, all these problems Mitt Romney talked about go back to George W. Bush, the previous president, and now continue were inherited by President Obama. At this point, you're sitting there, you're covering the White House. What is the White House thinking? What are their options right now?
They are exploring their options. I talked to a few administration. Obviously, anything but boots on the ground is being contemplated. One official told me that they're looking at kinetic options, but every one of them is a pretty bad option. If I could just go through a few. Airstrikes, for instance, are very difficult to execute at this juncture because we don't have bases in Iraq from which to launch them, so you'd have to figure out how to do that. Drones, same problem. Arms shipments to the Iraqi government and military would seem logical, except for the fact that the Iraqi military is folding like a cheap suit when confronted by these militias. You have CIA operations that are probably contemplated right now. It's complicated, obviously, as well. And then there was Carl Levin, the guy who runs, the senator who runs the Armed Services Committee, who made the point that anything you do in the short term, military-wise, doesn't really solve the long-term problem, which is bigger, which is that you need the Maliki government to be more inclusive. You need it to have more, a stronger military, obviously. So if you do push back ISIS in the short term, it doesn't solve anything. You have to couple that with long-term reforms, and it's to be seen whether you can get that in the near term with the Maliki government.
More in this show exactly how this impacts us in the long run and the men and women we are sending to these places to fight. John Heilman, if some critics of the administration, who will be on the show today, had their way, we'd be in Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and butting heads with Iran. Do we want that?
Yes. Well,
because that's the option, right? I mean, the choices are not good, and the choices were made for this administration.
Yes, well, and the truth is that anybody who wishes from that ugly Chinese menu to engage in more military intervention in those places.
And if you don't have family members who are there, I don't think I want to hear from you.
Has to contend with the fact that the broad American public has no appetite for any of those things on that Chinese menu or any combination of them. And so, Michael, I want to ask you a question about this, right? Because we just heard Mitt Romney. The cheap seats, although the seats in Park City, Utah are not that cheap.
Not that cheap.
but from the cheap seats, making his critique of President Obama. But he's out there right now with a bunch of Republicans and talking about the future of the Republican Party. This debate about foreign policy is now going to become a central debate in the Republican Party going forward as it chooses its nominee in 2016. So outline what that debate looks like. What are the factions within the party? Who has the upper hand? Neocons, isolationists? Talk about that a little bit.
I think the neocons have the upper hand on the rhetoric for sure. I mean, they have the whole bellwether of support around them from the Wall Street Journal and others that will further the argument that we left too soon. We should re-engage. Now, they're going to be very careful to tiptoe around the idea of boots on the ground, but they have that upper hand. The libertarian wing, which is actually not as isolationist as a lot of people like to paint it, would rather engage more systematically, looking at that Chinese menu and saying, what is our core strategic interest? And that's where we need to play. So that battle is going to play itself broadly. You know what the problem is? At the end of the day, neither the Bush administration nor this administration answered one fundamental question: what does Iraq look like when we leave?
Well,
the same
it looks like this.